Hi and welcome back to Politodoxy. I'm your host, Aaron Friedman. Today we have a guest whose name is Natalie Jean Breisner, who is an ex-Democrat now, as on her social media bio says, turned to a sane person, which is amazing because it's great to have Democrats with who changed and became conservative to get their point of view on how conservatives could change their language in regarding to speaking to Democrats being more effective in language. And now she does social media videos, making short content for people to see and to consume, to see what her point of view on the political realm. And as I understand, also you're pro-life, which is also awesome. So I would like you first to introduce yourself on your own terms, and we will continue on from there.
Yeah, you covered it. I like to say that I was a former atheist, Democrat, feminist, liberal, um, using that word loosely. I don't know that they're very liberal nowadays. And now I'm a Christian conservative commentator.
Well, that's awesome. So, first question is, I would like to know what caused you to walk away from the Democratic Party.
It was, in retrospect, I realized the seeds had been planted prior to this. Um, but it was really summer 2020 when I was told, essentially, I was totally on board with all of the COVID restrictions at first, foolishly. And I did my part. I stayed home, lost my jobs, didn't see family, and I was struggling emotionally and mental health wise, and also financially, because I'm someone who's been working since I was 16 and I need to work. And it's not my desire to be on unemployment. And it's shocking to me when I realized, well, I was basically, we were all told explicitly that we could go out and protest on behalf of BLM, but we couldn't go to work. I just thought that was the craziest thing in the world, and typically I would have been amenable to BLM, because at the time I was a Democrat, I was a liberal, I was on board with the woke stuff, that was sort of just seeping in. I wasn't, really aware of how far it would go, but it felt like there was no compassion, no concern for my concerns, which were financial, which were very serious. And I was basically told, whenever I would bring this up to my liberal friends and acquaintances, usually on a Facebook post, I would write these very long, very polite posts. Why can't we go to work? Why is everything caution taped off at the park? This seems a little bit extreme. I would be told to read White Fragility and how to be an anti-racist, and that I was racist, that I was selfish. I mean, there was just zero concern that I might have any honest reason for disagreeing with them. There was zero regard for that. And that changed my whole life. That changed my perspective, because I had thought that Democrats were for the little guy. I thought they were for the struggling, the underdog, the 99%. And it was so clear to me in their response to COVID, particularly when compared to the response to BLM, that they actually weren't.
So, what you're saying is that you were betrayed by the Democratic Party and by
Yes.
what the historians, what the good-hearted liberals they constantly told you. Liberals is to liberate oneself. It is to be the ultimate. It's the ultimate freedom, and it's basically it's to be good-hearted and compassionate. And what you're saying is that
Mhm.
you actually saw the opposite, and in not necessarily from a hatred point of view, although there is obviously some of that as you explained, but also from being too much compassionate, turning shoehorning into a completely different
Yes.
thing you promised. So how this is interesting because I would like to know also how long were you a Democrat?
I was a Democrat my whole life. I wasn't an activist. I didn't know anything about politics, which isn't something that I'm proud of. I had no idea. I just, every 4 years, I would go and vote for the Democrat president. So I voted for Obama once, and I voted for Clinton in
Was it a
2016.
vote blue no matter who situation, or were you politically fine tuned into what is going on?
No, I mean, it was vote blue no matter who, but honestly, just for president. I didn't know anything else on the ballot at all. So I didn't even vote for any other Democrats. It was just for president, so it was a very peripheral understanding. But you're right. I felt like a betrayal in 2020. And what I realized, I didn't jump straight to being a conservative. Obviously, that would be crazy. But in opening my eyes and walking away from the Democrat Party, I was able to open my eyes to a lot of this. I call it like toxic passion. I feel like it's toxic femininity, the flip side of the toxic masculinity that we love to talk about. It's this compassion turned up to 11, which ends up harming people. And I see that over and over again with Democrat policies. I don't know if they're trying to be compassionate or they just have this good messaging PR system, but it is veiled as compassion and it ends up harming the very people that they claim to want to help, most often women and minorities. And everyone else along with them. And that is what I experienced firsthand with the response to COVID. They thought they had the compassionate response, or at least they claimed they had the compassionate response, and I was harmed by it. And so were millions of other people. Obviously, we're seeing the effects now and probably will continue to see them, unfortunately, because of what we did during COVID.
Do you come from a traditionally Democrat family?
No, my parents are Republican, but again, they weren't super politically involved. But what I'm grateful for in retrospect is my dad was a big Trump supporter, and I could not understand it because I hated him. I thought he was so racist and so terrible. And I'm grateful in retrospect that I had my dad who was a Trump supporter, because I think it kept me grounded during my years of hating Donald Trump, because I knew that everything they were saying about Trump supporters, this and that, white supremacy, I knew it wasn't true of my father. So I'm glad in hindsight that he was there, because otherwise I might have really gone off the deep end with my hatred for Donald Trump, which I have since been cured of.
So, as a Democrat, what did you, when you were a Democrat, you were looking into what the Republican Party is about. What were your feelings toward the Republican Party? Well, because and I want to put this into a context of, we know that the Republican Party was the party of so-called progressive values, and I mean progressive, just progress in the racial sense, because the Republican Party was in the 1950s pushing for racial equality and pushing through civil rights bills. They were the party that give women the right to vote and so on and so forth. They were more or less pushing these things that now progressives claim as their own. So with that, how did you square the two, understanding that the Republican Party were the party of civil rights, the Democrats were the racist party? How did you justify being a Democrat and
Uh,
anti the racist rhetoric?
I didn't know that history, and I don't think a lot of people, young people especially nowadays, do. I don't know. I went to good schools. I was a good student, but it's only in the last 3 years since I've started becoming more involved in politics and more patriotic, uh, more love of my country and history and the founding, that I have realized that I was lied to about the Republican Party. So I will say that I don't think a lot of people understand the cognitive dissonance, because they're just not informed and they're not aware.
Interesting. As a Democrat, what were your feelings toward the Republican Party? The as the just the normal daily Republican who might not be that political, just may or may not be voting for Trump. What were your feelings towards those people?
I didn't think about it too much, but the typical talking points of wanting to control people. How could you possibly be against abortion, against women's choice? Certainly when Trump came along, I thought that he was racist. I thought that he was just an awful person. Couldn't really tell you why I thought he was racist specifically, which I think is common for a lot of people. They hate him because he has a personality that maybe is a little bit brash, but a lot of people cannot give you specifics of what exactly it is that he has done. And that is what I experienced while I was on that side, whether it was Trump or just the Republican Party. I was ignorant. And it's kind of interesting because I've always been, I like to think, an intelligent person and a critical thinker, but it just didn't extend to politics. And I do believe that a lot of people who are still calling themselves Democrats, I think that they are just unaware. I think that they do not know what they don't know. and I don't want to make excuses for them, but it is almost a full-time job to pay attention. And it is hard to realize that you've been lied to your whole life. You know, that you've been lied to about Donald Trump, that you've been lied to over and over and over again, that you've been lied to about COVID or BLM. It's easier to just put your head in the sand and continue to believe what you have always believed.
It's actually awesome and interesting to think about what you just mentioned about abortion and so on, because that would probably be one huge thing that would keep you as a Democrat, because
Mm-hmm.
it's such a huge polarizing issue.
Mm-hmm.
So you used to believe in the pro-choice arguments that it's a
Yes.
woman's right and they're taking away rights and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And now you say now you're pro-life. So
Yes.
when saying you're pro-life, how do you define being pro-life?
I am passionate and working towards the expansion, the recognition that human rights extend to every human who is alive. I believe that there is an ability and a way to honor and respect the rights and the lives of both mother and her offspring. That is what I mean by being pro-life.
So that would mean that there is no cutoff date for abortion. You're absolutely, completely, and utterly pro-life from conception.
Yes, in my opinion, yes. I understand that that's a controversial issue, and we like to say that it's not a winning issue when it comes to elections. But I mean, morally and scientifically, it is the truth. Any cutoff that you have past fertilization is arbitrary. It's you picking and choosing the heartbeat at 6 weeks or somewhere around 12 to 15 weeks to be like Europe, or birth, God forbid. But that's all arbitrary. At fertilization, a whole individuated, genetically distinct living human organism is formed. All of the DNA required for its entire life is there from fertilization. And obviously, that is well before any woman knows that she's pregnant, but that is when a new life begins. Even though that's an uncomfortable fact, it is a biological one.
So here's an interesting thing I would like to run by you, and I would like to hear what you think about it. I have complained, I've made a video about the what happened in Ohio. They passed a bill, an amendment that made it legal throughout all the 9 months of the pregnancy up until birth. So I asked the pro-life movement the question that, do you think that Ohioans are really that bloodthirsty and that interested in keeping in making it up until the moment of birth? Do you really believe that that is what's happening, or that pro-lifers have taken it too far? They're pushing it too aggressively in one direction, that now the other direction is winning. So I asked that question, and also I added that in order to win, you have to change the language. It's the climate that we live in is not pro-life per se. In some states we are, some states we're not. So in the states that we are, push it through, win the elections, get it done, no problem with that. But in the states that we are not there yet, which we should be, but we're not there yet, I said that you have to change the language on how you engage. So instead of calling it an abortion ban, you should call it a pro-life initiative. Why is that? Because an abortion ban, think about the wording, abortion ban. Ban is a negative word. And anybody who hears that and wants to preserve the abortion so-called right, they hear the word ban, they're like, wait a minute, they're taking away a right I had. So they automatically shut off to any other argument you'll be making. Look at this. How about 6 weeks? How about 18 weeks? Nothing will speak to them. Any communication you will try to argue, they will just no. They don't even want to hear it, because you're now banning something and you're taking away my rights. But
Yeah.
if you would say pro-life initiative, they're like, oh, okay, tell me more. Now this is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. It's an initiative. It's not a ban. No, we're not banning anything. We're just putting through an initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for that, it's funny that I got attacked on that. Not really attacked, but I got criticized on Twitter. I'm a shill and so on and so forth. I was like, we're all on the same page here. I want, if I could snap my fingers, I would outlaw abortion just like that throughout all 50 states, because life is worth
Mm-hmm.
fighting. It's a life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life is the first right you get. I mean, not
Yeah.
that you get, that you have, given by
Yes.
God. So I said that you should change the language and stop pushing that far. You should have incremental change. And I was called a shill and attacked for that on Twitter. So I would like to get your opinion on that. If you think that changing the language and also slowing down wherever you can, push through as quick as possible, go there, push through. In Florida, I'm sure you could push through bills very quickly. In
Mhm.
Louisiana, in Alabama, I'm sure you could do that as well. Texas, maybe that'll be a little harder, but I'm sure you could do the same in Texas. But once you get to states like Kansas or Iowa or New Hampshire, you'll have to slow down and
Mhm.
incrementally change and also change the language. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
No, I think, I mean, you said a lot there, but I thought a lot of it was very prescient. I mean, I think you're right. Language has power. Language matters. Obviously, the left is manipulating language when we see these propositions on ballots, etc. And I have no problem with calling a pro-life initiative. And I do think that I'm very interested in English and language, etc., and words, the way that I articulate things. So I think that's absolutely true. And your point about going a little bit slower, yeah, I mean, it's not something that pro-life people want to hear, but obviously we have to deal in practicalities. And I think that we very much have to change the culture and legislate in tandem. Obviously, if someone were to get in the White House or somewhere and do a complete ban on abortion, no, that wouldn't go over well. And it's easy to sit back and say, well, you're catering to the pro-abortion crowd, etc. However, my goal is not having a bunch of women walking around pregnant, unhappy that they're pregnant. That's not like my ultimate goal as a pro-lifer. So I do believe that we have to change the culture in tandem with the legislation. So that probably speaks to your point about going a little bit slower. But no, I originally, when you were speaking, you said something about pro-lifers going too far. I don't believe that pro-lifers have gone too far. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm pro-life. I think that we were always on a collision course for the past 50 years for this to happen. We all know, you and I understand that in 1973, seven men made a decision that was not based in the Constitution. I mean, not seven, whatever the majority was. And so we were always slated to have this happen. And for 50 years, pro-lifers have been fighting to have Roe overturned. It finally happened. And this was always going to happen because we've had at least two generations of women who have been lied to and who have been told that this is a constitutional fundamental right. And when that suddenly gets taken away, quote unquote, you're going to have a lot of reaction to that. And unfortunately, I think this is the first time since slavery that we've really had, now that Roe has fallen, you can go from one state to the next. And in one state, a group of humans is recognized as the are. And in the next state, they're not recognized as humans. So unfortunately, this is not going anywhere. And I think that this will continue to be a really moving issue that either could possibly further divide the United States of America, because this has not happened since slavery.
On winning the culture, as you said, we have to first win the culture in order to push through the pro-life measures and just be conservatives or just get back to a place of sanity. As a former Democrat and as a former liberal, even more importantly, I'm interested to know, what do you think would be the most effective way in talking to liberals and communicating to liberals? As and I'm framing this in the context of, as a former liberal, if I as a conservative were to approach you and start talking about politics and I were to convince you, what do you as a former liberal say would be the best way of convincing you to turn conservative, or at the very least join the conservatives on particular issues?
I wish I had a better answer for this question. I think it was Yuri Bezmenov and probably other people who said that you need to suffer in order to break out of brainwashing. And that was my experience, that I had to suffer. Not that I had never suffered prior to summer 2020, but I had to experience firsthand, as someone living in Los Angeles, the insanity of the response to COVID compared to the response to BLM. And I had to feel that in my pocketbook, and et cetera, et cetera. I probably wouldn't have changed. I like to think that by now I would have, but it wasn't someone convincing me. It wasn't someone talking to me. It was my experience in my life. And obviously that's not something you can manufacture for people. So it's not a very helpful response. But I do believe that it's important to keep speaking the truth, because I'm sure that there were little seeds planted along the way, that I would have never, that I didn't clock. And maybe that helped me along the way to become what I am today. But I don't think ultimately that you can necessarily change anyone's mind. But of course, I think it's important for conservatives, like I said, to keep speaking the truth, to keep asking questions. I think that if you continue to just ask questions and not go for the attack, which I know is easier said than done, liberal points of view, they do not hold water. You hold one quote unquote liberal point of view next to another liberal point of view. They oftentimes contradict each other, particularly in the abortion arena, but in almost every other arena. So if you keep asking questions, I think eventually, they won't be able to answer them anymore and stay consistent. So, that's not the answer you really want to hear, but it's the best one I've got.
As a liberal, would you ever consider having a conservative friend?
They never came up really, but yes, I would have. I've never been the type, like I said, my dad was a Trump supporter and I really hated him. So I've never been the type to be like, well, we can't be friends anymore. But honestly, I was an actress in Los Angeles. I'm a millennial. There's just, it felt like there wasn't a lot of conservatives. It still feels like that now, but I realize a lot of people are changing and there's also a lot of closeted people. But at the time, it just wasn't something that ever came up.
Interesting. So, as when turning conservative and seeing the betrayal of the liberal Democrats in California, you mentioned also something about them betraying not only you but also the small businesses, which would have been the first people they should be
Yes.
protecting, the small businesses. But
Yes.
instead, who did they actually protect? They protect the huge corporations. They protect
Yes.
the huge restaurants, not the small ones. What
Mhm.
effect did that have on you?
It had a big effect on me. I'm not a small business owner, but I worked for two small businesses at the time when COVID came down, and I lost both of those jobs overnight within 24 hours of each other, and I never saw those jobs again, which obviously I did not know at the time. And those jobs meant something to me. One of them was a restaurant that I had helped open 5 years earlier, and I saw firsthand how much these people were struggling. And one of the things I distinctly remember, specifically in summer 2020, going back to my catalyst moment, my catalyst for change, was I would take these long walks around LA because I didn't have jobs, obviously, and I didn't have a car, and I was trying to stay sane. And while the BLM riots and protests, but a lot of riots were starting to happen, I watched these independent stores, these mom and pop restaurants that had just barely been allowed to open in LA, because this was like late May, early June. They had just barely been allowed to open with all these restrictions still, the plastic dividers, only two people allowed inside at a time, whatever. I watched them have to close their doors again and board up and put like black owned business on the outside. And I just thought, this is absolutely the craziest thing in the world. There's no way this is good for us. Here we are in the middle of a pandemic, allegedly. We've all had to shut down. We've all had to take a hit in business. And now here it is coming again, just in June of 2020. And I don't care what color you are. This isn't good for the community. And what blew my mind even more was that in LA, and obviously across the nation, but particularly in LA, there was never any course correction as we learned more information about anything. It was never like, well, let's redirect, let's change our original response. LA kept the same exact response throughout. We were in a mask mandate for 2 years without stopping, and again, it's just so crazy to me, this idea that small business owners don't matter. Again, I don't care what color you are. And there was the moratorium on rent. Okay, well, the left hates landlords because they own property, etc. But those are just regular people who own property, and so yes, I don't want anyone to be out on the street because they can't pay their rent because they couldn't go to work because they weren't allowed. But then also, what about the people who own the properties and who are trying to feed their families? So the whole thing was just categorically insane. And this idea that only white people, were the ones who cared, or only wealthy people were the ones who cared. No, a lot of people suffered from this response. And how the left can continue to turn a blind eye to it. I haven't heard one apology from one Democrat about the way that they responded to COVID. And it continues to kind of blow my mind a little bit to this day.
Now that you have changed, you've turned around, became a conservative. I'd like to know how do you consider yourself to be more a fiscally conservative, socially conservative, maybe a little bit libertarian? What would you say you are? In which political ideology do you align the most?
I would say I'm both fiscally and socially conservative with a kind of a libertarian bent. I appreciate libertarianism, and I certainly relate to them on many things. I've been especially appreciating some of them with their responses to global conflict in recent months and in the past year or so. But conservative.
So you're not interested, as a libertarian, you're not interested in funding any foreign wars. You want to be more, let's take the word isolationist, more to keep to what's happening here in the United States, help our own homeless, make sure that there are no illegal immigrants, and so on and so forth. Any problems, first take care of all the problems in the United States. And then, if
Yeah.
we have time, we'll check on what the rest of the world is up to. That's basically, have I got that correct?
Yeah, and I put the caveat. I'm not obviously a geopolitical expert. I'm far more confident in my stances on social issues like abortion and feminism and things like that. But yes, when I look around, I definitely consider myself a populist. And when I look around, I see Americans suffering. I see the American dream disappearing for a lot of people, especially people in my generation. People like to give millennials a hard time. I think it's deserved a lot of the time. But I also think that a lot of millennials feel resentful that we weren't able to afford the things that our parents could afford on less, And I want to see Americans have the American dream, as opposed to inviting everyone to come here illegally or even really legally. I think it should be harder to come legally. I know that's not a popular
That is
position.
interesting.
And
That is interesting what you just
what?
said there. So you
Yeah.
turned you turned from liberal to more conservative. So this is the most interesting part, because for liberals, one of the most important things is illegal immigration and even legal immigration. But just letting in refugees, the refugee system is a scam. For those people who don't know, it's mostly a scam. But here's the thing. So I would like to know, when becoming more conservative, so this is the interesting part. You had to accept, okay, this one thing, I'm gonna, you know what, maybe the right is here correct on this part. And then you say, okay, maybe the right also on this part, and maybe on this part, and this part. So how did it go? How did you become from one part saying that the conservatives got one thing right till just embracing almost everything the conservatives say? So basically, my question is, from a liberal, how does one liberal become a conservative and completely switch everything, turn everything upside down, and becoming and embracing everything the conservative movement has to offer, more or less everything? But that's the
Yeah.
question.
Well, like I said, it didn't happen overnight. It was really over the course of about a year and a half. And I don't know. I wish I could give a step by step. I walked away from the Democrat Party summer 2020, and I started listening. I remember looking around and thinking, okay, well, Donald Trump, even though he did mishandle COVID in a lot of ways, it was like he was the only one talking about opening the country. So then, and I was so desperate to open up that I was like, well, maybe he's not as bad as I thought. And then I started researching him. And then I realized that I watched the full Charlottesville press conference. I was floored to find that he did not say there's very fine people on both sides. That blew
Here's the
my
funny
mind.
thing
And
about
it has
it.
taken me.
Here's the funny
What's
thing
that?
about it. Here's the funny thing about the
Yeah.
Charlottesville,
Yeah.
that liberals, they said that he said there are good people on both sides. That would indicate that Donald Trump thinks that leftists are good people. So that just didn't make any sense, because if he did say good people on both sides, then that would only indicate that he thinks that as far left, you could be as far left as you want and be a good person, and far right as you want to be a good person. That just doesn't make any sense. So
That's true.
continue. I just
That's a
want
good
to say
point.
that.
No, that's a good point. And of course, they always say it in the context of Nazis, that he was praising the Nazis, but he immediately, twice in that conference alone, he says not the Nazis. And then I went on to find these YouTube compilations of him condemning white supremacy over and over and over and over and over again, probably more than any other president in the history of our nation. And so that was all news to me. I couldn't believe how much I'd been lied to, because they had told, I mean, Joe Biden launched his campaign on this man refuses to condemn white supremacy and said there's very fine people on both sides. So that blew my mind of like, why do you have to lie to me so much about this guy if he's as bad as you say he is? And it really was just, you know, I remember I started listening to like Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and these famous conservative people that I would have never listened to. Honestly, I don't even know if I knew that they existed, to be honest. And I started realizing that their positions make sense. That, you know, going back to the border, a secure border is a humane border. Yeah, it's a nice idea. Well, let's let everybody in. These people are suffering. They're poor. They're not like what we have in America. But when you have an open border, then you've got trafficking and you've got people dying trying to get here and things like that. And you have people, Americans who are lower on the socioeconomic scale, which are typically Black Americans. You have them suffering because here they are being priced out of their jobs because illegal immigrants will come and do it for less. So it's like the left does not think, or maybe it's all planned out, but I think the average American, quote unquote, liberal does not think about the results of their positions. It's like, yes, it sounds really nice. Be for a woman's choice. Let everybody come in, you know, be a good Christian, share, yada, yada. But then what is the result of that? Because we live in the real world. And so it really was just opening my eyes to, wow, conservatives make sense, you know, and they've got the science on their side. For the other side claims to be the side of science, they've got this, they've got the science, they've got morality, they've got ethics, you know.
This is something
I believe that's
that
because
is
they have
that
God.
this is something that really got to me when they say the science. I was like, what do you mean the science? There's no such thing as the
Yeah.
science, capital T, capital S, the science. It's basically
Mhm.
the Bible. Okay, that is an authority. The science is not an authority. It's a method.
Right.
It's a way of calculating the best moves forward. It's a way of calculating the the world as it is, but it's not an authority. Science should never be an authority. It should
Exactly.
be a metric, a tool, so on and so forth. So when they said the science,
Mhm.
it was basically them saying what we have to say, and whatever we have to say, you have to follow, as Fauci
Exactly.
said, that he is
Yeah,
the science.
he's the science. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I found in my own questioning of, I was just questioning, you know, BLM. I was just questioning, why do we have to stay
We
home?
can't
You know,
have
why
that.
does everybody have to? But yeah, you can't question. Exactly. If you question, you're racist and you're selfish. And these are people that I knew in my life who I had worked with and done theater with. And it was just, and who liked me, you know, and it was very, very odd that you can't question anything at all. And here we are 3 years later, and my questions and all of our questions, your questions too, were were relevant questions that should have been answered.
Do you still have liberal friends?
Well, I have liberal family members. You know, some members of my immediate family are liberal. But no, I can't say that I have liberal friends, which is unfortunate. But a lot of people that, you know, knew me, especially once I started speaking out and the content started reaching a little, you know, a few more people growing, a lot of people blocked, unfollowed, unfriended, which is their prerogative, you know.
So
But it's unfortunate because I'm the same person I always was. I'm just have different viewpoints.
you'd still love to have liberal friends, but they are the ones who blocked you. Did you love a substantial
Mhm.
amount of liberal friends?
No, I have to be honest. I didn't lose a substantial amount because, and I think this is another thing that caused my shift. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very isolated. I mean, obviously in summer 2020, we were all isolated, but prior to COVID, I was very isolated. I was kind of lost in life, kind of just drifting. I had stopped acting, stopped pursuing acting, and I was just kind of drifting through life and not living a very secular lifestyle. And so I think that is part of what paved the way for my shift is that even beyond COVID and beyond the ridiculousness of it and my righteous indignation, my life was not bringing me contentment. My life was not bringing me peace. And so I think that's part of what called me back to God is that I had a deep hole inside of me and a knowing that there had to be a better way to live. And again, I found that in voices like Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro, who, yes, talk about politics, but obviously also, particularly Dennis Prager, about a better way to live, and that we've really lost sight of that in many ways in the modern day West. So that really spoke to me. So I think that was another building block, not just of, oh, this is crazy what's going on in LA, but what was going on in my own life and in my own heart and how lost I felt. So I can't say that I lost, years long friends from high school, et cetera, but it is hard always to see, okay, this person blocked me, this person unfollowed me, they unfriended me. I got some nasty messages. I still get some nasty messages from people who used to know me or claim that they used to know me. They're usually in anonymous profiles. And it stings, it hurts. I'm human.
Cowards.
And of course, I wouldn't mind being friends with liberals, I mean, that's just such a silly thing. I'm not going to, how could I hate you just because you vote for Joe Biden? I don't understand it. I think it's stupid. I think it's ignorant, especially at this point. But how could I possibly, say that I hate you, especially because I have siblings who are liberal? So it's a very unfortunate position that we find ourselves in.
So you've mentioned a few times Dennis Prager. So what kind of content from Dennis Prager did you watch? Did you watch the 4-minute video formats or the long speeches that he gives?
I've watched a lot. I used to watch. I don't as much anymore, but I used to watch, what is it, like the fireside chats or something, and he does do those 5-minute videos. And I used to listen to his radio program on podcast too, and some of the things just struck me. I like it when he says that you have an obligation to be as happy as you can possibly be. I like that, and it's something that isn't quite expected from a religious person, but it's like taking care of I think he says it's like taking care of your bad breath. You wouldn't go out with bad breath. So don't go out with a bad attitude. I still listen to him when he's interviewed on other podcasts that I listen to. And I always find him, very compelling and profound and just full of wisdom. And now, of course, I've expanded. I listen to a lot of other things. But again, it was just that thing of like, okay, these people make sense. They're not hateful. They're not bigoted. They're not racist. They're not any of this stuff. They're just speaking sense about what's going on in the world and how to live a better life. And that's what really spoke to me.
You should definitely reach out to Dennis Prager, and maybe that you could do a 5-minute video with him on your journey on becoming more conservative. I think that would be a pretty interesting video.
Thank you.
I would like
I've reached out to them. I'll continue to, though.
I think that'll be very interesting and very informative. So here's something. I'd like to know, who are the 5 conservatives that you watched that had the greatest influence on you on turning more conservative?
Well, I guess since I've mentioned him a few times, I would say Dennis Prager. I remember discovering Dave Rubin, and I've since, I do disagree with him on a lot now, but I remember watching I guess he would talk about it. It happened prior, his interview with Larry Elder and how Larry Elder red pilled him, he always says. And then I went back and watched the interview. And again, there was Larry Elder talking sense about the Black community and basically just schooling Dave Rubin, who he's this gay man who thought he was, doing good and caring about the Blacks and this and that. And Larry Elder just comes in again with facts, so that was someone who had influence on me. Who else? I remember Gothics. She's lesser known. I just spoke at a walkaway event with her. She was a gamer, I guess, which is totally not my thing at all. I mean, I used to love video games as a kid, but I don't know anything about it anymore. And then she had a very similar timeline to mine, a very similar walkaway experience. And it just so happened that she had a kind of a big following already. And then she started speaking about it. And now I think she's a Christian too, as well. So we've had very similar stories where she just realized, what's going on with COVID. This is insane. So that was someone who really spoke to me, and I subscribed to her members only for a while. Gina Carano was another one. And that's why I mentioned Ben Shapiro a lot, because I remember seeing her on Ben Shapiro's Sunday special. And Gina Carano was one particularly because I used to be an actress, and I remember what she got in trouble for posting was just the most nothing at all offensive, not even comparing anyone to the Holocaust or to Holocaust victims or survivors. It was something about how they came for, I don't even remember what it was.
The Jews,
it was
and something like, sorry, first they
maybe so.
they dehumanized a certain people, the Jews, and she said that
Yeah,
dehumanizing people who don't wear masks or don't take the vaccine, and made
yeah.
that Holocaust reference.
Yeah, it was you're right. It was something like that. And I thought it was absolutely insane because I mean, here's this woman who's not political at all and she's just posting this fairly innocuous thing and then she gets fired from Disney and I had felt the same thing going on. Obviously I don't have the fame of Gina Carano, but when I would post these things on Facebook, just like dip my toe in the water of, oh, maybe we should get back to work and maybe we should not have all the jungle gyms caution tape off at the park, like maybe people need to get out and get some sun or whatever it is, I would just be like railroaded. And I felt this like empathy with Gina Carano and I appreciated hearing her story on the Sunday special and then obviously what she's done with Daily Wire since. So yeah, I don't know if that was 5 people, but those are the things that stand out to me when I was just kind of like, because it feels kind of scary and it feels kind of exciting, where you're kind of like questioning everything that you thought was true and real. It can be a really isolating experience. And I appreciate the people that went through it before me or went through it alongside me, even though they didn't know me and I didn't know them personally.
Interesting about what you mentioned, that you almost at the same time when Gothics was becoming more
Mm-hmm.
conservative, almost at the same time you were also becoming more conservative. And I also
Yeah.
remember the time I was watching her videos weekly, and yeah, I think it was weekly, and it was pretty interesting to see the transformation as it was happening. That she was at the first kind of apologetic about it, saying that, listen, this makes sense on the conservative right, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna take the common sense road. And then when she became more conservative, she was like, listen, this is how it is. You don't like it, then get out of
Yeah.
here. She became less
She's
apologetic
definitely
and
that
more
way now.
confident
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
her point of view. And
Mm-hmm.
interesting part about that is that at the same time she became more religious. She was, I think she
Mm-hmm.
was an atheist at first, and then she became much more religious. And
Mm-hmm.
you have gone through the same transformation from becoming an atheist to becoming more religious.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I say it's kind of interesting to me that it was the same timeline and the same sequence of events, and I was honored to share the stage with her at the Walkaway event.
So now
But you're right. It's
nowadays,
it's it's just
go
common
ahead.
sense. It's really is just common sense. And then I also too. I started out very trepid. I don't have the reach that she has, and I'm apologetic. And then so many people just push back on you, and so many people give you so much just blind hatred that now I have become a little bit more brash and just tell it like it is, and much more strong in my point of view. But for every bit of pushback you get, there's like 25 positive comments. So it definitely more than balances out. But yeah, I appreciate seeing other people go through the same journey. And you're right, it is just purely common sense.
When you were a liberal, you say that you were a feminist, and now you've turned anti-feminist. Why is
Yes,
that?
because feminism hurts women. Feminism hurts everybody, but it hurts women first, and then eventually hurts men because what's good for women is good for men, and vice versa. We've been lied to for so long, and I think you look around and you see it. Women are more unhappy than ever before. Women are the number one. We take the most SSRIs. I think it's 1 in 4 women over 60 are on an SSRI. And I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with taking medication if you feel that it helps you and you've tried everything else prior to. But it's just interesting to me that we have more rights, more economic opportunities than ever before, certainly than our grandmothers, and yet we're more unhappy than ever before. A lot of women are single and childless. 1 in 4 40-year-olds in the US have never been married at all, which is obviously just an astronomical number that we've never seen, and that men and women. And it's just, I don't think I think that it has sort of led us to where we are today, where nobody knows what a woman is, even biologically speaking, but nobody knows what a woman is, even spiritually speaking. Like, we don't know what a woman is different than a man. And we have trained women to be like men, you know, to work the same jobs, work the same number of hours, to be the boss babes or the boss B words, certainly to have physical intimacy like men. I mean, I'm not encouraging men to have promiscuous relations either, but it affects them differently. You know, I think it's wrong. I know it's wrong for either gender, but it affects men differently than it does women. And yet we don't talk about that. Women are just supposed to be able to have it with no strings attached, and then also have it and not get pregnant because you should be on birth control, or, you know, you can go get the abortion. I mean, I don't see anywhere in our culture that we praise women. And I know men feel attacked, and I think they are attacked as well. I think we praise masculinity when it's in women, but not in men. And that is obviously just so backwards. There's this weird war on men, but then we love it when we see masculinity in women. We just can't get enough of it. And that helps no one. That makes everyone feel awful, because then men are being discarded and women are being discarded because femininity is being discarded. And, you know, it used to be that, oh, well, we just want women to have the option to work outside the home. Well, now you have to work outside the home.
That
And
was
if a
always
young
the
woman
plan. I
ever,
would argue it was
well,
always the plan.
yes,
I'm trying
yes.
to remember who it
Mhm,
was. Betty Friedan, or no? Actually,
mhm.
she was the moderate. She was crazy, but she was the moderate compared to, I don't remember which one. That that when Betty Friedan said that women should have that right, the other
Yes,
one, I apologize, I don't remember the name, said that no, they should be encouraged to
right.
go outside the home. It
Because
should
if they
be
get the
more than
choice,
a
they'll
right. It should
always
be the
choose.
norm.
Yeah. Hmm. Yes.
Are
And
you
and she made the
a
point.
are you
Go
against
ahead.
the all waves of feminism? Are you against only the first one, third one? Which where do you put your foot down?
Well, listen, that's a hard question to answer because it's not popular. I think we can all agree that third and fourth waves are different than first and second. I mean, I talked about third and fourth being, you know, everything from certainly abortion to where we are now. I don't like any of it though. I don't
So
like any of it. I mean, I think there's this idea that feminism just went awry somewhere, and oh, it started off with good intentions and then we kind of just skated off course. I think it always was bad intentions. I think it always hated men. I think it always maligned men. That woman that I don't remember her name either, but the woman that you just mentioned was not anyone recently. I don't even think it was Betty Friedan's contemporary. I think it was like early 1900s, I believe. And she did say, if you give them the choice, women will want to stay home. Women will always
correct.
choose that. So I think feminism has always been veiled in lies and in man hatred and in wanting to be like men. So I don't think any of it was good. And obviously, you couldn't have where we are now without the first and the second wave. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, oh, the first and second waves were good. And I also, you know, I'm never going to advocate for I will never advocate for repealing a constitutional amendment. I mean, it's impossibly hard. I'm not trying to take away rights from anyone. But yeah, I mean, women voting hasn't been great for the country. And if women couldn't vote, we'd never have another Democratic president ever again. It just would not be possible. So, I mean, there's that, you know.
That argument
I,
actually, that argument that you just
what?
made, I think it speaks more to that women are more emotionally oriented. So
Yes.
the compassion arguments that liberals make, that speaks more to women. So
Mhm.
the you could say that the answer is not taking away women's right to vote. It is that women find a husband, talk to their
Yeah.
husband, and their husband will explain to them, listen, I'm the authority in the house. I
Mhm.
am I I I'm more politically. I believe that every man should and every husband should be politically oriented. They should know the politics of the
Mhm.
day. They should know exactly what's up, and they should be able to explain. So I believe that changing things up that way, like the 1950s, you'll get a much more stable society. Let's just put it that way. So you are completely against every wave of feminism. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, listen, someone's gonna be listening to this and say, well, they tell me all the time, you've got social media profiles and you have a credit card and blah, blah, blah. But that's also because I live in this world and we are backwards, and I would rather be not on social media, and I would rather be, you know, at home with a husband, like making babies and I mean, if I'm being honest, but we live in this world, and I think I have an important voice. And that's the problem, is that if you say you're against every wave of feminism, people think, oh, well, you want to set us back. But we have lost really timeless truths because God, I think that, yes, what you just said about a woman looking to her husband and her husband being able to guide her. Well, so many women are unmarried, though. So then, yeah, if you say, well, we're going to take away your credit card and we're going to take away your job and your right to vote, women will be SOL because we're not getting married, etc. So this really all goes back to like the war on the family, which again, I think is another proponent that feminism has always had from day one. It has been against the nuclear family. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate, obviously, I am benefiting from feminism in many ways because I'm an unmarried woman who's making a living and that kind of thing. But do I think it's been good for women? No, I don't think it's been good for women. And I think that it was always inevitable, but I think that we would have been better off without it. And I think I look around and I see people in my generation and I see them miserable. So I think that we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to this. Like I said, I think this was always inevitable, and I don't want to take away women's right to vote, but we threw out everything in the name of progress.
Would you say that it's not about taking away the right of women to vote? It's more of trying to reestablish the sanity that was beforehand, which was that if you had a vested interest in the United States, you owned property, you could be drafted, and all of those other things,
Yeah.
you get to vote. But since women were not drafted, you don't get to vote. So
Yeah.
I would say that maybe going back to a system that it's not about, oh, you're a woman, so you can't vote. It's basically, you're not going to get drafted, so you shouldn't vote, regardless if you're a man or a
Right.
woman. Would you say that
Right.
that system would be something that you might be interested in implementing? Obviously not now, and you're not going to take anybody's rights away anytime soon. But let's say the conservatives get their crap together and start really pushing through conservative ideas, pushing and winning the colleges, winning the schools, and changing the minds, having babies, changing the entire culture. Let's say that in 50 years from now, that we're starting to talk, okay, we can start changing up a few old things that we used to have. Would you say that that would be a improvement on the country, going back to something akin to the 1950s, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, obviously, I don't want to go back to the 1950s. They got a lot of stuff wrong, obviously, especially when it comes to race relations, etc. But
No, nobody's talking about
yes,
that. Nobody's talking
no,
about the
no,
race
I know.
relations.
Yes, we're talking about gender relations, and even still, I would say they did get a lot wrong when it comes to gender relations. I think that, uh, you know, there was a repression and a uh, I do appreciate now that we are, this is getting off tangent, so I won't go into too much. I do appreciate now that we are, I think in the 1950s and the 1960s, there was a lot of hurt people who were not in therapy, who were not doing any kind of work, who were just kind of shoving it all down. And I see that in my own grandparents in many ways, and it manifested in alcoholism and that kind of thing. So I do think we have made progress in some sense in the relation between men and women since then, because I see people trying to do work and trying to be a better partner and a better parent. So it's not all lost, but that's nothing to do with women voting. Yes, I do think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, changing the culture in tandem with legislation. So what you spoke about in 50 years, if we keep having babies, and unfortunately the left keeps aborting their babies or sterilizing their babies, there will be less leftist babies, which doesn't make me happy, but it's just the reality of it. They're more likely to get abortions and to sterilize their kids. Then yeah, I mean, yes, hopefully we can change the culture. And again, it doesn't come down to taking away the right to vote, because obviously you also can't do that if there's unmarried women. But you're right about the draft and things, when they were talking about giving women the right to vote, a lot of women didn't want it because they said we don't want to be in the fire brigade, we don't want to be drafted. And it is sort of unfair. Life's not fair, but it is unfair that women can vote when we can't be drafted. And then the voting age was higher, and they lowered it to 18 in the
60s.
when was it? The
Yes, under Richard
1960s, but
Nixon.
because they needed. Okay, yes. And then it was lowered for women as well. They lowered it to 18 because they needed more men eligible for the draft. And yet now women who are 18 can vote as well. So that's really also not fair that you already got the right to vote and now you get to vote younger just because we needed to draft more people. But again, you're not being drafted. So, but again, this is something that we have been raised to believe we have a right to. And God forbid you take it away from us. So yeah, it goes back to changing the culture, because if it's a bunch of unmarried women and men and the women don't have anyone and you're telling them, oh, well, listen to your husband, and they don't have a husband who loves them and cares for them, which I think is something that maybe they didn't have in the 1950s. We're talking about real love and real care. Then yeah, you're basically telling women to take a hike. So we have to
I
change
don't
the
think
culture too, and you can't force people to get married and that kind of thing. But go
I
ahead.
don't think that in the 1950s there were no husbands who loved their wives.
Oh,
I
I'm sure there
mean,
were. I'm sure there were. That
I would
not
say the
no,
vast
not
majority.
none.
I
Maybe.
would say that the vast majority of cases that are upplayed by the media, that, oh, look at these people, they were repressed, and other people,
Mhm.
they there was sexual harassment and all the rest of the things. I think it's highly produced. It's
Blown
not.
out of proportion. Hmm.
Yes, it's very much
Yeah.
blown out of proportion,
Hmm.
especially considering the liberals' record of lying about history. I mean,
Hmm.
they lied about Joe McCarthy as McCarthyism, which didn't exist. It was Joe McCarthy was a great American patriot. I'll not get into that. I made an episode on that. If anybody
Hmm.
wants to listen to that, you can listen to that. I bring the receipts on it. Anyway, but
Good for
they
you.
lied about, at the time period, they lied about how terrible it was. Well, let's see what happened afterward. The 60s happened, feminism, the long march
Hmm.
through the institutions, and the Kennedys came into power. Basically, this whole new wave of the hippies as well,
Yeah.
the whole new wave of liberal ideology flooded America. And what has happened since then? They promised you, here's the thing, they promised you that all these new liberal ideas is going to make the country better. Did the country become better? Well, suicides are up,
No.
depression is up. Basically, almost every metric, the inflation, you used to be able to go with one income on the household, have a lot of children, and
Yeah.
people could afford it. It was an amazing time in the 50s compared to right now. The stability of people. Here is another thing: when you go out, you ask the average person about any politics, it's basically it's stupidity. Most people who you ask out there about politics or about geography and so on and so forth, they have no freaking idea. You ask people from the
Mhm.
1950s random questions, they know what they're talking about. I'm sure you'll find a fool there, here or there, but nowadays it's mainstream. Back then you had to find the fool. So they promise you everything
Mhm.
is going to change. All the things are going to become better. If you embrace all the liberalism, what happened? Quite the opposite. Depression is up. Basically, all the bad metrics are up. So that's why I'm saying. That's why I am saying that. First, let's go back to how it was in the 50s. Let's go back, and
Yeah. Well, if I
we're not talking about the
go
racial
ahead.
stuff. We're not talking about
Yeah.
the bad stuff. We're talking
Yeah.
about the good stuff. Having a family. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking
Mhm.
about the sexual harassment. Nobody's talking about that.
I
Why would anybody want to go back to that? We're talking about the good stuff, the things that created families. Let's take away the Lyndon Baines Johnson, his bill on giving women childcare. What was that? I'm trying to remember what the Great Society programs.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
that it created women with have an incentive for women to have children while
Mhm.
not being married.
Out of
And
wedlock. Yes. You get
yes,
more money when
that
the father's not in the home. Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
And this is absolutely terrible. So
Yes.
repeal those things from the 1960s. Let's go back to something that's akin to the 1950s without the problems. We can do that. We don't have to have the problems of the 1950s. We could have the good stuff
Well,
without
there's
the problems.
always
Go ahead.
yes, but this is why it comes back always to God. You know, it you have to
Yes.
come back to God first. It's that we've lost God, because if I would make one defense of feminism, if I at all, and kind of what I was getting at when it comes to relationships in the 1950s, which I can't speak to firsthand, you know, we see this right now. I think it's a justified and understandable rise, but I think it's completely misguided in like the red pill manosphere culture, you know, defending men for promiscuity and for cheating, and you know, this is a man's nature, et cetera, et cetera. And when women have no economic opportunity and recourse, yeah, a woman has to accept that. A woman has to accept that he is providing and here. He's the father of my children. He's married to me, but it is his nature to go out and do those kinds of things. I do think that maybe some of that happened more in that time period, and a woman had to take it for better or worse. And I do not agree with divorce, so and that kind of thing. But that's why it goes back to God. Is you need God, because we can go back, we can maybe take away some of these restrictions or implement some of these restrictions, go back in time, change the culture, etc. But it always comes back to God. It comes back to being a righteous man and a virtuous woman, and that's the really important part, that I
But
think
here's an
we
interesting
miss
thing
sometimes.
about the 1960s and the new wave of
Mhm.
liberalism is that in the 1965 they kicked God out of the public school, which a public school shouldn't exist anyway. We should have
Yeah,
private schools, affordable private schools, charter schools, and so on and so forth. Or at the very least, if there's a problem, if we can't build such schools, then you would have a public school that belongs to the state, and localized, so it would be much more in the hands of the parents what the child is taught. So there will be much more
mhm.
accountability on that front. But they kicked out God of the public schools, and what you just mentioned, that we need to bring back God. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
Is the 1950s, you had all these institutions
You're right.
built into the
Mhm.
system, and the 1960s teared everything down, and since then
Mhm.
people's lives have become meaningless and nihilistic and hedonistic, which is
Yes.
I mean, that I guess that is the meaning of liberalism, is to liberate oneself from the self, and to do whatever drugs, to do whatever pleasures that earth can offer, do that, and
Yeah.
nobody's allowed to stop you. But are you really liberal? Are you really liberated if
Mhm.
if you're addicted to your desires and your passions and your pleasures? Are you really a free person, or are you just addicted and a slave to
Right.
your inner beast? Anyway, I
Yeah.
really enjoyed
Well,
talking with
discipline is
you.
a path to liberation. Yeah, of course. You know that. Yeah. I enjoyed speaking with you too.
Yeah. So before we end this, first I want you to mention wherever people can find you, and if they're interested, if they took anything away from this conversation, if they want to mention, they want to talk to you about these things, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram at Natalie Jean Beisner and Twitter at NJ Beisner, Beisner. I'm on YouTube and True Social and Rumble and TikTok too, but those are the two main platforms that I'm on. Or I guess it's X now, not Twitter. But yeah, you can find
No,
me there
it's
if you just
Twitter.
search Natalie Beisner.
I don't care what anybody
Okay.
says. It's Twitter. I just
Yeah, it's
can't.
hard
I
to let
can't go
go
with X. He should pick some other name. I'm willing to change the name if he really wants it, but not X. It sounds like an adult website.
It
Let's
does.
just leave
X
it there.
always sounds like that. Yeah.
It really does, and let's just leave it there. So, if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at Aaron Politidoxy on Twitter, or on Instagram at Aaron Friedman. Or if you want to email me, you can email me at politidoxy@gmail.com. I thank you very much for listening to this episode. Please share. This will be available on Rumble, Spotify, and on YouTube. Please leave a like, leave 5 stars, and you could also leave a comment. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Please, and most important thing, share. And remember, my fellow radicals, stay political.